The coach pointed to the middle of the pitch and said, "You run everything." It sounded simple, almost casual, yet for the boy, still small in his torn shoes and mud-streaked socks, it was the moment his fate quietly shifted. Long before that command, he had been chasing balls across a schoolyard, legs moving before his mind even understood why. His parents weren't sure what to make of it. His mother thought it was just wasted energy. His father sometimes wondered if there was something more. But the boy himself never questioned. Running after the ball wasn't a choice, it was a reflex, like breathing. That first real training session was nothing glamorous. Puddles of rain, a pitch that smelled of wet earth, lungs burning with each sprint. Yet he never slowed. He wore exhaustion like a second jersey, as if each ragged breath was proof that he belonged. And when the coach gave him that vague order, "Run it all," he didn't need a definition. He only knew that being told to run made him important, even if he didn't yet know why. From that day on, he was no longer just a kid kicking a ball. He was the one expected to carry the game's heartbeat. Whether he realized it or not, the role had already claimed him. But here's the question no one asked at the time. Did the boy choose the midfield, or did the midfield choose him? The roar came after the goal, but the goal was never his. The boy had intercepted a pass near the halfway line, twisted his body before pressure arrived, and sent the ball forward in a single clean motion. Seconds later, the net rippled, the crowd cheered, and yet all the noise belonged to someone else. Looking back, that was his first moment, a moment that dissolved as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by applause for the scorer. But for him, it was proof that he could hold the game in his hands without ever touching the finish. Rewind the tape and you'd see a kid who looked almost reckless with joy, appearing everywhere, 1 second blocking a shot in his own box, the next chasing a counterattack. He wasn't the tallest or the loudest, but he was everywhere. He loved it, at least at first. Loved the chaos of being allowed to do everything at once. It was nothing like the street games, where he could dribble for fun, score when he wanted, or rest on the sidelines. This was different. Here, there were rules, tactical diagrams, orders barked from the sideline. At first, the restrictions felt suffocating, but slowly he discovered pride in them, being called the link, the glue, the one who made it all connect. And yet, that pride carried a shadow. If no one remembered the interception, if no one mentioned the run, then was the joy really his to keep? Maybe he wasn't falling in love with midfield at all. Maybe midfield was already wrapping its invisible chains around him. The locker room was loud. Too loud for anyone to notice the boy in the corner. The striker sat in the center like a king, teammates circling, coach clapping his back, fans peeking through the door for a photo. Laughter echoed off the tiled walls, beer sprayed into the air, and in the middle of it all, one name kept repeating, the man who scored. Rewind the numbers, though, and a different picture appears. 11 kilometers covered, 89% passing accuracy, 3 interceptions that broke the opponent's rhythm. But those digits lived quietly on a GPS tracker, never on headlines. At home, the next morning, the newspaper told the same story. Heroic goal secures victory. No mention of the tackle in the 87th minute. No mention of the simple sideways pass that launched the winning move. On television, the highlight reel looped endlessly. Goal, celebration, arms raised. The run before it, the work that cleared the space, edited out like a deleted scene. From the outside, it almost felt comical. How could the piece that held the puzzle together be invisible once the picture was complete? Yet that was the reality of his position. The glory always skipped a step, landing elsewhere. And maybe, just maybe, that was the cruel beauty of it. Being unseen didn't mean being unimportant. It meant he carried a kind of weight the scoreboard could never measure. She cheered when the striker scored. Everyone saw her, front row, hands raised, bracelet flashing his number in silver. The cameras even caught her smile, the kind that lingers longer than any replay. Meanwhile, only a few yards away, the midfielder's shirt clung to his body, soaked with sweat, proof of the miles he had already run. He searched the stands out of instinct, hoping for a glance, a nod, anything. But when his eyes finally found her, she was already laughing in someone else's glow. It was a cruel contrast, the salt of his sweat against the shimmer of her jewelry. One told the story of labor, the other of loyalty. But not to him. Teammates called it focus. Coaches said it was maturity. But somewhere between the silence of his corner and the noise of her applause, the thought began to creep in. If no one sees the work, does the work still matter? For a fleeting moment he imagined quitting, walking away from a game that ignored him, from a girl who never once looked past the goal scorer. Yet the whistle blew, The ball rolled, and his legs moved again. Because maybe, just maybe, he wasn't running for her at all. He often wondered what he was missing, the one trait that could etch his name into memory. Others were celebrated, he was tolerated. And in the quiet hours he studied the men who turned invisibility into legend. There was Conte, sprinting as if powered by a secret fuel, tackling with joy, grinning like football was still a schoolyard game. People loved him for running, but never asked how it felt to run forever. The boy saw himself there. Then came Milner, defying the clock. 37, still sprinting, still chasing kids half his age, still refusing to slow down. From him, the boy learned that endurance could outlast talent, at least for a while. Henderson offered another lesson, leadership born in mockery, called basic, dismissed as just a runner until the day Liverpool broke down without him. He taught that value is sometimes proven only in absence. And then there were the artists, Kroos, Modric. One dissected games with surgical passes, the other conducted them like symphonies. They weren't running just to run, they were painting pictures invisible until the final stroke. Watching them, he realized effort alone was never enough. There had to be elegance, a kind of poetry hidden inside the grind. So who was he really? Another Conte without the smile? A Henderson without the armband? A shadow of Modric without the magic? He didn't know. But perhaps that was the cruelest riddle of midfield. Greatness was often noticed only when it was already gone. The needle slid into his ankle, cortisone pushing fire into swollen tissue, and still the question came, ready for Saturday? That was the climax of his career now. Not goals, not glory, just chemicals holding him together long enough to survive 90 more minutes. But the truth had started earlier, in the quiet hours. Nights spent staring at the ceiling, joints throbbing, searching for a position that didn't hurt. Mornings when the alarm rang and he still dragged himself to training, not because he wanted to, but because the team whispered the same unspoken word. We need you. From the outside, his life looked heroic. In reality, it mirrored the invisible ones. The factory worker on a night shift, the stagehand sweeping confetti long after the show. Men and women whose names nobody knew, yet without them, the machine stopped. He was football's version of that, an unseen cog spinning so the gears around him could shine. And yet, unlike the factory floor or the theater backstage, there was no rotation, no shift change. He couldn't clock out. Every week demanded more miles, more tackles, more silent sacrifice. So when people said professional footballer, they imagined luxury and fame, but in truth, his was closer to shift work, only with brighter lights and longer scars. And maybe that was the irony. The more he broke down, the more he belonged to the game. The scoreboard read 0-3, but the numbers said less than the silence. In the locker room, heads hung low, boots untied without urgency, and the coach stood in the corner, muttering as if searching for answers he already knew. The team had collapsed, and everyone felt the missing piece. He wasn't there. That was the difference. It was almost cruel in its symmetry. When he played, his presence was invisible, taken for granted, folded into the background like oxygen. But the moment he was gone, the air grew thin, and everyone gasped for breath. Suddenly, his name was on their lips. Not in praise, but in complaint. We can't do it without him. The irony cut sharper than any injury. To matter only through absence. To be recognized not for the runs made, the tackles won, the order maintained, but for the void left behind when none of it was there. And yet, maybe that was the strange paradox of his role. Stars were celebrated for presence. Midfielders perhaps achieved a different kind of immortality. They became unforgettable only when missing. The boots hung on a hook, the tape frayed and yellowed, the last sweat-soaked shirt left to dry under a pale sun. That was his farewell. Not a parade, not fireworks, just artifacts of labor surrendered to silence. Now he watched the game from a couch, an ice pack resting more out of habit than necessity. The television fed him highlight after highlight, goals on loop, celebrations replayed from every angle. The crowd roared for the final act, but his eyes drifted elsewhere. He remembered the moments before the spotlight, an interception that shifted momentum, a run that carved space, a pass that cut the lines. The camera never lingered there. It never would. And yet, in that quiet room, he finally understood the cruel beauty of his role. Midfielders were never meant to be remembered by name. They were meant to make the game possible, to keep the system alive. Without them, the goals that lit up the screen could not exist. Perhaps that was enough. Or perhaps it wasn't. As the screen replayed another goal, his reflection flickered faintly on the glass, an image almost invisible but still there, still present, even when no one was watching. At the center of every pitch lies a circle most fans ignore. To them, it's just paint on grass. To midfielders, it is something else entirely. A scar carved into the field, the place where battles begin, where lungs first burn, and where bodies fall and rise again. That circle tells the truth. Midfielders were never born to be crowned. They don't live in the headlines or on magazine covers. Their job is to remind the world that football isn't a solo act of glory, but a collective symphony, where someone must keep time while others chase melody. Yes, their names fade. Commentators forget them. Highlights erase them. And still, somewhere, a boy will pull on a number 6 or 8, not because he dreams of scoring goals, but because he wants to inherit the grit, the persistence, the invisible labor of those who came before. That is the true legacy of midfield. So why does it hurt to be a midfielder? Because the pain was never meant to be rewarded. It was meant to prove something greater, that even without applause, without headlines, without memory, the game only exists because of them. And maybe, just maybe, that's the cruelest twist of all. Their absence will echo louder than their presence ever did.